welcome you to this, what hopes to be an interesting panel discussion on the role that social media played in the protests last year, swept across North Africa and the Middle East. As we all witnessed them, they were pretty dramatic events, and much has been said in the past year since them about the role social media has played. There's been a discussion, was it actually social media, was it the new media ecology that actually helped to empower people to take to the streets, or were other factors involved? What role did social media play? What role does it continue to play? And then I think the other question we want to look at is the demographics of that people-powered protest, those who are involved in it. What are the limits? What are the benefits? What encourages people to get out there to participate, whether it be through social media or then taking the final step and taking to the streets? And what discourages them from participating? With us to hopefully answer some of those questions, or maybe go even further and ask us more questions to think about, which we can then reconvene next year and see if we found any more answers, are two people who've been investigating this issue from an academic level. They've been conducting surveys, they've been analyzing the role that social media has played. And with me today are Fadi Salem, who is a teacher at the Dubai School of Government. He's been examining in a series of reports the role that social media has played in the Arab world, and he'll have a presentation on the demographics and the social structures at stake here. And we also have Zeynep, she said that I didn't have to say her last name. I'll try it again. Tufekci, who is an assistant professor at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and she's also been investigating the role social media has played, and especially the interaction between technology and society. So I'd like to welcome them both. We're going to start with Fadi. Each one of them has about a 15-minute impulse presentation, after which then we will hopefully have lots of questions from you. And that'll take us up to about our hour's time. So thank you, Fadi.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to start with throwing some numbers at you, and then a few photos and lots of questions. And maybe that will raise some more questions next. So what was the role of social media in the Arab Spring? I mean, there was good, bad, and ugly things that happened during the past year. And to start with, let's get this question out of the way. So was the Arab Spring a Facebook revolution? Show of hands? I can't see anything. Probably I'll say nobody raised their hands. But the interesting thing is, if you ask this question in Egypt, usually you get a lot of people raising their hands that it's, yes, a Facebook revolution. Let that continue to be a question to be answered later. So would it have happened if it wasn't for all the iconic activists, or I mean, they weren't activists at the time, but they were people who died, and their death, their suffering was used. They became icons. They was used using social media. It was distributed over YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and then fueled into traditional media. So would it have happened if it wasn't for social media penetration and a critical mass of users in the Arab world? That's another question. So let's deconstruct what happened in the Arab Spring. This is very simplified, but I will use it anyway. It was a demographic revolution of sort. First and foremost, there was a young population, very young in the Arab world. There was a youth bulge, or so-called youth bulge, a massive unemployment that existed for a long time, with 100 million jobs needed in the Arab world. And there was a social revolution of sort, one that created or based on new social norms that existed in the society in many Arab countries, where expectations were becoming different. People were thinking that good enough is not enough anymore, that an economic and democratic freedom is something that you should be looking for. And then there was a technological revolution of sort. And for that, there was a critical mass of users across the region in certain countries that use technology with increased accessibility, with less costs, and with more know-how. So what did that materialize into? And for example, let's take Facebook. During the past year, it grew from 18 million users in the Arab world. That was in October 2010, just before the Arab Spring, up to 34 million in October 2011, after most of the revolutions. And then it slowed down again, but still it grew fast, up to 43 million users today. And these are numbers we're just producing. These are, you're privileged. This is the first time I'm showing these numbers. So this is how the penetration of Facebook looks in the Arab world today. You have countries with up to 30, 40% penetration rate. Most of the users are under 30 years of age, or 70% of them, actually. Women, though, are only 34% of the users. If you look at Twitter, and these are all new numbers also at March, the active Twitter users in the Arab world today are around 1.5 million. And by active users, I mean people who at least tweets once a month. And this is based on Twitter definition of sort. They actually define it as somebody who accesses their account once a month. But that wouldn't be as accurate, in my view, than this one. So there's around 8.4 million users of Twitter. Most of them do not tweet, but read, or at least maybe not even do that. And there's around 173 million tweets generated in March this year. So let's ask some questions. What are the changing perceptions in the post-Arab Spring based on social media? Is it a tool for women empowerment? This is a questionnaire that we actually distributed across the region. I will not present the results, but all of the results of many of the questions I'm raising here, the findings of our surveys are available in the Arab Social Media Report, which you can download on the website below. So does it close or bridge the virtual gender gap? Is it a gender equalizer? In some of the answers that we had in the questions we raised in the survey shows that actually most of the responses from men and women are almost equal. They view the role of social media playing in women empowerment very similarly in many levels. Did it revolutionize media consumption? Another question, but I'll skip. Did it enhance freedom of expression? These are also the findings based on Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia of our survey. I mean, these are snapshots in time that may change after the survey was taken, but these are at the time of the survey taken. These were the impressions that we got. So let's talk about the good quickly. We all saw the photos, the euphoria of the Arab Spring and the Arab revolutions, and that materialized into something in many countries, or some countries at least, into a more democratic state, while others is still in transition. However, what we know is that it actually, a large number of the population in the Arab world, 43 million of them today, have new social dynamics, that affects their lives. The use of social media by many of those young people made trust transmittable through some of the communities. In other words, if you look at how the activists use social media, or not even activists, even people in civil society, it lowered the cost of creating a trust relationship between different groups. I mean, this is arguable, but if you go in secret groups on Facebook and see what activists do, and how even without them knowing each other, they put themselves at risk, I mean, their lives at risk, that will give you an impression that even by being in such a secret, social, trustworthy connection helps in a way to push activists to do something. What we also know is that there was a shift in 2011 in the uses of social media from primarily social uses into political uses. So more people using it to disseminate information, to engage with citizens, even if you're a government, to organize protests, citizen journalism, other than the previous ways of sharing media and entertainment. And when we asked in Tunisia and Egypt during the revolution, we got around 85 to 90% of the people responding at the time, Facebook users, saying, this is the respondents of the survey, up to 90% saying that the uses of social media or Facebook during the revolutions was primarily political, either raising awareness or organizing protests or others. How are they using Twitter? If you look at the hashtags, the top used hashtags on Twitter from February, we also had results for September and March. This is in the Arab world. They all correlate with the revolutions at the time. Today in March, it's Bahrain. That's the second one is Syria in Arabic, then Bahrain in Arabic, then Syria in English, then Egypt and Kuwait. But the most, if you like, the most critical thing that probably social media example that social media had a role in is how the demonstrations were ignited in many countries. In many countries, it was a Facebook event or a page of a call for a date, the date as set on Facebook or using social media, other social media, but primarily Facebook, that generated a point that everybody decided to go out and take it to the street for a certain cause. It materialized into protest in every single time other than one, which was Syria and the first call for demonstration in February. And that was because social media was closed, blocked for 3 years before that date in Syria. That's one reason. So what about the bad side? And this is the stuff that Evgeny Morozov would like, really. So, by the way, these are just photoshopped photos. They're not real, just in case you're wondering. So what was the reaction in many countries? In Egypt, the first reaction by the government was to pull the kill switch. Let's close the internet. People are using it to demonstrate, to organize, and this is not good. So that was the reaction for 6 days during the revolution in Egypt. The government blocked the internet. However, that backfired. People in Tahrir didn't care anymore. I mean, the ignition started, and it took a life on its own, and even they created their own Facebook wall in Tahrir Square offline. So what was the primary impact of blocking the internet in Egypt? This is what we asked actually in Egypt and Tunisia during the revolutions, or just after them. And the reaction that was surprising a bit at the time, that it was a positive thing. Most of the users, or most of the people that answered this questionnaire said that it was a positive thing. It made people more determined and pushed the undecided people to take it to the street because they felt that one more right was taken away from them. So some governments learned from that mistakes. 5 days after Egypt blocked, and then unblocked the social media and the internet, the Syrian government actually unblocked social media sites, which was blocked for 3 years before that date. So they saw that, one, this is something that could backfire, and now it's growing in popularity. Plus, many would say that they actually wanted to monitor what's happening online. But that's also taking place. So, I mean, this is not new in the Arab world. This transparency aspect of has been going on for decades. I mean, centuries ago, this is the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus, for example. This is the big thing in the middle, is where the government holds all the treasury, all the gold. And that's in the middle of a mosque, the grand mosque of the city. So if you are in the government and want to take money from the treasury to use it, you would have to walk between the prayers and see that everybody would know what you took, how much you took, etc. But that information still wants to be free today even. Even during the demonstrations, when everybody was blocking the internet in some governments, people came up with very innovative ways of disseminating information. Other than the normal Bluetooth, dial-up browsing, anonymous browsing, the satellite phones, one of the most interesting one was this photo on your left-hand side. This is a makeshift battery with a speaker, with a USB connection, and sometimes with a wireless controller. And this is put in different areas around Syria by demonstrators, just to, when the internet is disconnected, even the electricity is sometimes disconnected from neighborhoods, people will use this to either organize, you put it somewhere in a tree, in a rooftop, whatever, and either use it to organize or even just to blare revolutionary songs. The other bad thing I would say about the social media uses is the postmodern policymaking and the informational weak link. Many of what's happening in the policymaking cycles in the Middle East today, or even on the international level, is based on social media as a primary source, especially in cases like Syria, again, where access to information is not available by journalists or the media. So social media sources generate or move the information from the ground. Citizen journalists pick them up. Mainstream media picks it up. Then it goes to think tanks and organizations and goes into the foreign policy making cycles, which also recycled again through social media. That's a weak link. Nobody should be having such power to reach. Some of the information generated on social media are used in the United Nations Security Council, for example, without proper checking. I would call it the Friday names foreign policy making in many ways. This is related to how the Friday names, the very popular, every Friday has a name in many of the revolutions that are still taking place, especially Yemen and Syria. You have around 20,000 people on Facebook voting for a name of that Friday. And sometimes that name would be, we want arms to fight against the regime. And that 20,000 people on Facebook, they're anonymous. They're mostly not Syrian, for example, if you're talking about the case of Syria. And they're determining the way that this goes into the policymaking cycle, because this is picked up by Al Jazeera, and it's put as, this is what the people want. And then that's picked up by policymakers, justifying doing something like arming the rebels, for example, based on few thousand people who decided this. And this is very powerful. And then there's the post-Arab Spring Twitter diplomatic tensions. The most recent one is Al-Jizawi's case that created a buzz between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, where the embassies were closed. And this is something growing. People are using it in different ways, in a chaotic way, in different countries. So what is the impact on media integrity? I touched this a little bit, on this a little bit. But there are unprecedented errors in reporting in the Arab world based on over-reliance of social media sources. And you have today a restrictive information environment by the government and an avalanche of information coming from advocacy groups, from activists. This effectively means that many of the media becomes a victim of sorts when they don't have access, sometimes willingly so, in many Arab countries. There are many emerging risks, which I will not be going through a lot. But it affects the internet censorship, monitoring, the legal implications that are generated and created today, the propaganda wars that are taking place, especially in countries where the population is split. And there are hate campaigns by both sides, amplified by social media. And then there's opportunism. This is the ugly side of the whole thing, in my view. There are many businesses created based on this lack of accessibility to information in many of these countries. There are professional perception management companies and techniques, social media-based regime change consultants that get usually contacting me all the time, and social media revolution businesses. And then there are the celebrity activist phenomena. And this is something that's, I'll keep it on label it as the ugly side of the whole thing. So finally, just a quick 2 lessons out of many, maybe, is that maybe people should be realizing that activism is not citizen journalism. Which one is it? Which one should be relying on? Many people are merging the two, especially the activists, which lead to a media becoming a victim for political struggles, and then creating this perceived reality is not a valid or legitimate form of advocacy, because it can cost lives in many ways. Then there's the media credibility and integrity that is also very much affected after the social media revolution, if you like, in the Arab world. There are limited fact-checking, there's over-reliance on social media sources, and there's no liability, spreading the information. I was in some of the largest media companies in the Arab world, watching in the newsroom. I was in the newsroom, and I watched how the news took place. Somebody on Skype asking a question for an anonymous person somewhere nobody knows where. And she was saying at the time, how many people were killed in Homs today? And she got immediate responses, 31. 30 seconds later, it appeared on the screen on Al Arabiya without any fact checking. That's too much information. What if the person which mistyped 31 instead of 13? Anyway, reality is bad enough. Nobody needs to amplify or make it worse. And this is, in a way, many citizen journalists are doing this same thing. I'll leave it here, and maybe we can talk about this also in the questions afterwards. You want this?
So, Zeynep, now you're going to take us a little bit further and address why this is such an interesting topic and what we can learn from it. Are we ready? Can we? Okay.
My name is Zeynep Tufekci, and I can be found pretty easily either through Twitter or on my blog, technosociology.org. And I will be putting up the presentation and a lot of the numbers there. There are already some of it there in case you're trying to find it. And as you said, I'm an assistant professor at University of North Carolina and a fellow at the Harvard Berkman Center for Internet and Society. So I want to start by talking about, is this better? Okay, I want to start by talking about why the social media and the new media ecology helps break the autocratic model the way it was practiced in the Middle East and why it presents a challenge. I mean, we all know, as Fadi said, there is something about, there's something with Facebook, there's something about social media, and we know it played some sort of role. But what is sort of the conceptual understanding of what role it played? And I want to start, but I really am not wanting to discuss was it Facebook or the people, not because I don't have an answer, because I think this is really the wrong and misleading question. Is this better? Yes. All right. I could just yell instead. That would work maybe. So I think the question, was it Facebook or people, has the wrong conceptualization of what Facebook is to begin with or Twitter is to begin with. It's like thinking of the online world as if it's the matrix and we live in the Zion and these are two separate things and we just transport from one or the other. That's just not the way it is. Just the way the telephone and other forms of communication are just part of one world. Facebook and Twitter and all other social media platforms are not in a separate world. It's just integrated into this world. And in fact, that is exactly why they are powerful platforms. So I just don't have, I think the question is wrong. So I also think, was it online or offline is the wrong question, because why is it an either or? What's actually interesting for me is how is the public sphere transformed when you have these new tools? How is the infrastructure of connectivity altered? And how are bits and atoms integrated and therefore changing the way we do things? And this is important. When I say I don't want to discuss was it online or offline, I do not at all mean to say that there is no difference. There are no different properties between the online worlds of bits and offline worlds of atoms. In fact, there are quite different properties just because the way the internet is organized and the way networks travel. And all sorts of models of control of people that are based on the assumption that you can physically control information, that you can physically control the atoms, are being challenged. And a lot of industries are being disrupted exactly because atoms do not have the same properties of travel. Bits don't have the same properties of sharing and copying and travel that atoms do. To give an example, the music industry has been facing quite a challenge because our copyright laws, at least in the United States and a lot of the Western countries, are based on the idea that when they sell you something, they're not really giving up their control over it, but because it's a physical thing, like a CD or a book, that you can't just make 3 billion copies of it, right? So the properties of atoms, that they're not easy to copy, is what our copyright laws are based on, and they're being challenged. In autocratic countries, and also in more developed democracies too, modes of power based on controlling physical people, information, are being challenged by the integration of a very different kind of infrastructure of connectivity. So how do you control the public sphere, and why do atoms change how the public sphere is controlled? One thing is pluralistic ignorance. And this is a political science term that I find quite useful in understanding why social media makes a difference. And I'm going to give an example I've been giving in lots of talks, and I'm going to get in trouble one of these days for giving this example. I hope it's not this time. So let's assume that you guys are all really, really bored at the moment. You're thinking, what is this? What is she talking about? I really hope, I want to go and get some coffee. What time is it? And you're really fidgeting and you're unhappy about this. But you're sitting there by yourself thinking, she's really boring. And you're probably not going to get up, in the middle of my talk and say, oh, you're boring, and just walk out, right? It's kind of rude, and we're socialized into, we're social creatures. We don't really go and disrupt people. I give this example in classrooms too, and I'm really afraid one of these days somebody's going to be like, oh, wait. But let's now assume that you all have a back channel, that our internet is working really well, and you're all able to communicate with each other. And somebody starts tweeting, she's really boring, and I hear there's coffee outside. You can imagine how this could actually break down what political scientists call pluralistic ignorance, where you are, in fact, your privately held views are, in fact, the majority, but you do not know this, because there are various barriers to sharing your privately held views, so that everybody finds out, oh, wait, we all think this similarly. We all want to walk out of here. We've all had enough. You see, that's pluralistic ignorance. And you can really see why in a country or a region where the public sphere was so severely controlled, breaking of pluralistic ignorance, where you already have unpopular regimes, can be so powerful. And another thing that these governments had been doing to control the public sphere was disproportionate punishment of dissent. What I mean by that is, let's assume that you really decided you had it and you're going to get up and walk out anyway. But let's assume that I have a bucket of water that I'm able to dump on the very first person that walks out, right? That makes it quite unlikely that you'll be the first one to do it, because I have this strong way of punishing the first person that walks out. I may not have a way to punish 100 people, but if I have a very severe punishment for the first one to get up, that really dissuades people. And we've seen this disproportionate punishment of dissidents is a very integral part of every autocratic regime. It's not just that the Chinese government is afraid of a single blind lawyer going from village to village, right? It's not they know one person isn't the big deal. It's the example. It's the, if we let this person, what will the others do? That is how it works. That's why we see, torture and, very, very disproportionate punishment integral to a lot of these regimes. Now, what happens when you have a system in which you don't necessarily have to be the first, and you can coordinate so 50 people can get up at once? See, just because autocratic regimes can operate and punish without institutional checks and balances does not mean that they can actually punish every dissenter if 100,000 people are in the streets. They have constraints on their resources. They can't do everything. And finally, that is a way of preventing a cascade of dissent from happening. So Fadi already talked about this. So this is the We Are All Khalid Said website, which was where the January 25th protest was first announced and called for. And what this did in Egypt was give people a place and a date that they could show up right after Tunisia, where the sense that change was in the air, but instead of going out 20, 30, 40, 50 people at a time that they had done year before and the year before, they had January 25 protests before. It's just 150 people showed up, and then 5,000 police showed up. You know, it just doesn't, it's not very useful. So you had hundreds of thousands of people clicking on, I like this. Yes, I'm going. As a friend of mine said, it must have been the first revolution in history where people said, yes, I will be attending the revolution in response to an Evite, and then showed up. And the very first day, we had thousands of people show up, which is very important, because once you have 5,000, 10,000 people, it's harder to punish a few, and then this can start a cascade. So public is a meta concept. It's not what you know. The point isn't that Egyptians learned that Mubarak was corrupt. The point isn't that Tunisians learned that Ben Ali was corrupt. The point is, using their new means of information flows, they could talk to their fellow citizens that they agreed, and more importantly maybe, they could make their calculations on how to proceed together rather than being punished one by one. So, oops. So this is, I'm going to show you guys, let me just say, I'm going to show you guys a bit of numbers. And these are from a survey we did during the unrest in Tahrir. This is a protester survey. It's a sample of 1,000. It's a snowball sample, which means we did not randomly sample. We tried to randomly sample, but the situation was so dangerous that it just wasn't possible. So it's not a perfect representative sample, but it is quite large for this kind of survey. If there are academics among you, these are usually very hard to do, and we did this during the unrest, so it was even harder. So, and this was published in the recent issue of Journal of Communication. It was no paywall for the month of April. Unfortunately, I believe it's gone back to paywall, but if anybody wants it, just find me, and I've been emailing it to everybody, and I'm looking for ways to make it more accessible. So these findings are all published in a peer-reviewed journal. I'm just going to show you a few numbers. So, oh, wrong way. So where did you first hear of the protests? Almost half the, I will put these up. Almost half the protesters heard of it face-to-face, but about 28% heard it first from Facebook. Again, this is the online-offline merger, and to me this is striking because Facebook was in Arabic only in 2009. So in 2 years, we're seeing how it became such a prominent sort of conduit of information. So did you produce and share visuals from the protests as it's happening? About half the participants in our sample did not, but about half did. So just in the sample, there are 500 citizen journalists, just in the sample. So if you kind of extrapolate, keeping in mind that this is not a representative sample, even if, you know, maybe not 50%, let's say we found a particularly active group, even if 10% were doing this, that means you had tens of thousands of citizen journalists in Tahrir at the time. You can see why it's so difficult to keep the news from getting out. And it's an ecology, let me show you, like, and Facebook was the primary means through which people shared visuals. Now, Twitter, for example, is a small percent, but you have to understand, it's an ecology, right? So, because it's an ecology, Twitter played a key role as a bridge. So it's not just about the percentages, right? Twitter was very useful in getting the news from Tahrir to outside the world, and Facebook very often useful for within the country because of the way the lightweight of Twitter. So you can't always just look at the percentages, but the percentages themselves are striking. So this is a picture I took in Tahrir during another protest, and right there on the 8th floor of that building is the Al Jazeera camera. That's a famous sort of camera that protectively hovered over. And that's just a protester. I took his picture. He was wearing those Tahrir Square Freedom Facebook photos, which they're selling to tourists around Tahrir now. That's kind of like what's become, instead of selling you little sphinxes and pyramids, they sell you Facebook T-shirts. You got to make a living. And you know, it's a great time to go to Egypt, by the way. I know there's a lot of scary news coming out, but there's not that many tourists, and there's a lot of things that are quite nice going on. So, So he's taking a photograph, and a lot of this gets shown on Al Jazeera, partly because Al Jazeera didn't always have people on the ground, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. There were networks of citizen journalists who had been working with broadcast organizations like Al Jazeera that played key intermediary roles. In fact, that's what I mean when I say online, offline integrated, is for example, and I can, this conference itself, I have heard from many activists that I keep hearing of a couple of things. One is Global Voices, which is this organization that I know lots of people are from. And people tell me again and again that it played a key role in making people around the region meet. I hear about Republica, people from the region, sometimes from different countries, met here for the first time in person. And that was important to their, establishing their trust networks. I hear about things like the Arab bloggers meeting in Berlin 2009. So there was this offline, face-to-face trust network on top of the online network, on top of the Al Jazeera citizen journalist network that were all mixed together that helped create a kind of information flow that just was not possible before these tools, and that autocratic governments did not, at the time, at least Egypt and Tunisia, know how to respond. But as Fadi explained, they are now trying very hard to learn. So I just wrote that out in words, but this is in my article, and I will, it's in my blog. I did what we call multivariate regressions, which means we control for demographic factors to see how social media users behaved, to make sure that social media is not just a proxy for education or something like that. For example, it's not just that the educated people were more active and they also happen to be social media users. It's just for academics among you. The short of it is, my finding is that when you control for other things, like age, like education, what you find is that social media users who were more active in the protest, they were a lot more likely to be there on Tahrir in that crucial first day, that people who had internet at home were more likely to be in the protest. But it wasn't just this broad internet. People who were using the internet for socially and through social media were, in fact, through lots of sort of multivariate numerical analysis, they were there in those first crucial days. So this is a finding. So overall, Facebook was the primary mechanism for producing and disseminating content. About half our sample was participant as citizen journalism, and all of that is right. I just put the sort of reference there for people who want more details, and as I said, I will be happy to send more. So it's not simple, though. Social media is more participation, lots of questions that we'll talk just a little bit. What more participation means is not yet, it's not more participation equals more democracy. Democracy is a lot more than participation. Participation can lead to things that are not always positive. It can be complicated. There's a lot of new ways. And governments are adapting and trying to respond by reasserting their control over the public sphere, which has been challenged, I believe, pretty much everywhere. And you talked a lot about that. So if you depend on these things that I talked about, if you were a government or a business, you depended on your information monopoly, control over gatekeepers, pluralistic ignorance, divide and conquer, advantage of speed over the people. If you depended on those factors to run your business or to run your government, I believe that there is change and challenge in the air. And here they come, and people are here, and we will see how this plays out. So thank you very much.
So now I think we have some time for questions from the audience. Please just, there will be microphones going around if you wear the microphones so we can see. Well, if you stand up and ask questions, direct them to the Fadi or Zeynep then, please. Anybody have any discussions on the issue of demographics? Fadi presented the good, bad, the ugly. Here's a question. It's hard to see.
Thank you very much. You hear me? Hasnan Bukhari from University of Erfurt. Thank you very much, Fadi, for your excellent presentation. Although I must say I haven't gone really through the report that you mentioned, and the facts that are mentioned there are absolutely fascinating what new social media has done. Now the question is regarding social media and the Arab Spring. Although Libya and Tunisia fall in North Africa, but it was still called as an Arab Spring. This is something that we need to think about. Now, the second question is, like I said, I am not sure what are the facts mentioned in the report, but could you please highlight certain issues that, for example, there are still countries where there is a monarchy, there is a kingdomship, and the social media doesn't really play a role. Is it because we still need oil from there, or is it because you know, we are giving them a little bit of a room, benefit of a doubt? Certain countries where women can still not drive the car, but there is also, is there a case that there is no massive unemployment there, or there is no youth there who would like to use this social media? Secondly, the social media itself, the technology, somehow played its role in this region, the Arab region or Middle East, over and again. It's not a new thing. Back in '79, when Imam Khomeini was leading the Irani revolution, they relied a lot on technology as well. Remember the facsimile machines? Remember the tape recorders? That was also a media revolution. Why, maybe if you could highlight in your, how you have mentioned in the report, why these countries, this region, rely on this new media, which is more synonymous with the Western technologies? Thank you.
Okay. Fadi, do you want to answer that? Yeah.
Sure. I think the first question was regarding the naming of the Arab Spring, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, that's a larger question, but I mean, there's always somebody who will not be comfortable with some name or another. There's, you know, whatever you consider is politically correct, go with it. Some people would like to use the name Arab Uprisings. Some people would use Middle Eastern Uprisings, Awakening, all other kind of names. So, you know, it's just one of those names that, you know, I don't like the name globalization, but I use it because everybody does. Anyway, so the last question, the other question you asked is the Khomeini tape and how it, you know, the tape recorders and how it influenced or was the main driver, if you like, and that was considered the main driver of the Iranian revolution at the time. True, information flows in different ways. It's faster using social media. There are more links between different groups of people in society, and there's a trust element, and it's more interactive and user-generated. It's not top-down like what was in the case of Khomeini. So it becomes faster, less controllable. And that's the fact that, you know, when you have a critical mass of users using social media, and they create these endless links, trust links between each other, and if one of these links generates information, it will be considered as real and right, and, you know, something to act upon by the others in the trust circle. These are all elements that should be considered. So there are virtual civil society movements, if you like, created in the Arab world, in these countries, where they didn't exist in real life. They didn't have access to, people didn't have either civil society movements because the governments didn't allow them. They didn't have free parliaments because there was, you know, no real elections or representation taking place, and there was no free media. And suddenly there was this channel with a critical mass of users using it to effectively create changes, and it worked. And as Zeynep and in my presentation, you know, these are some of the elements of how it did work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. Well, the Arab Spring name comes from, actually, it's like a throwback to 1848, the springtime of the people, which actually happened in Europe. And back then, too, both the railroad communication, I mean, the railways that were just being started in Europe, and telegraph, which was first starting to spread the news, were a key part, obviously not the only part. I mean, neither of us is saying that for that. So I completely agree that social media predates digital media. Absolutely. In fact, the Iranian Revolution of '79 is a very good example of small media, interpersonal media versus challenging the control of the public sphere. There's a great book by Annabelle Serebrini Mohammadi called Small Media, Big Media in Iran '79. If you look at it, you see the very same dynamics. It was just more crude and slower at the time. And in terms of other places where there is social media but not necessarily an uprising, I don't think either of us are saying that it creates dissent where there is not. It is more a way to challenge the public sphere where there is dissent. And in fact, even in the Gulf region, which is much better off, we have this ongoing, fairly broad, it's not maybe as broad, but fairly broad uprising continuing in Bahrain, and social media is a big part of the story. So it's not like social media is this magic wand, but it does change the dynamics when there is already dissent on the ground, and people are just looking for a way to come together and organize.
Okay. There was another question here, yeah.
Thank you for both of your talks. I've learned a lot. I'm interested in the role democracy will play in future. We could, in the West, very good rely to the uprising for freedom. And now in Egypt we have a parliament which consists of the Muslim Brotherhood and Salafist parties. And I'm wondering, is this just my Western bias that, or is it a problem? Is it a problem which emerges that we'll have in the future these modern middle classes who can afford social media and like social media, and the rural people who vote for conservative parties? Will we have a permanent revolution even when there is democracy?
Is that one of the particular speakers you'd like to answer that question, or which of you feel comfortable?
I'm not sure which of you can answer that.
Okay, Fadi, go ahead.
So again, there's a. Let's take a look at how social media demographics grew in Egypt, for example. That just for the sake of the example you mentioned, it started with in the beginning of 2011 or in end of 2010. With a small number, around 1 million or 1.5 million people on Facebook. That's taking Facebook as an example. Today, it grew up to around 8. And at the time, it was primarily people with English language abilities, middle class, young, educated students. These are the main demographics. Today, if you look at the usage trends on Facebook, you would have, there's a larger portion of the user base in Egypt, which was at the time around 50 to 60% English speaking, or people who were using Facebook in English. Today, it's much larger who are people using Facebook in Arabic, which means that it is growing beyond the elite. It's reaching the masses. And this is growing very fast in terms of, of number of users. So what I'm saying is that social media, if it reaches and becomes representative, or people on social media become a representation of the people in the real society of the population, then you will have a better representation of what's taking place in real society, not just, not just the view that the elite are leading with the social media revolution and reaching, providing democracy and freedom of speech. No, you will have a Pandora box. You will have the society itself being represented and everybody using the same tools to push their agenda and try to reach the political office if that's the case. So yes, you will have more representation of maybe conservative groups, maybe even the government will have a better use of social media to actually oppress these movements. Even extremist groups, even violent groups are using social media very fluently in some of these countries currently. So, it'll be whatever exists in society. This is what I think. It's not going to be pushing freedom or democracy or whatever. It will be just amplifying or a new channel of representing what's happening in society.
I have the same.
Okay.
Hi, thanks. This is a really wonderful talk. I wonder, it would be great to hear either of you actually go a little bit deeper inside the data on social media use. So I love the media ecology framing, of course, Zeynep, and shameless plug, Christine and I will be talking about this afternoon in the Occupy Media Ecology talk. But so one of the things that we found in looking at how social media is used in the Occupy movement is that really, when you look inside the broad use figures, right, there are people who spend lots of time developing digital media skills and produce really nice videos and are followed by many, many people, you know, on Twitter. There's sort of the reproduction. I'm not going to call it hierarchy, but there are some people who are very effective and become known and trusted and followed by many. And I'm not saying that as a critique. I'm just really interested in the dynamics of the citizen media and activist media spaces where some people do emerge as sort of key actors in the new media spaces. And if you could talk a little bit more about how that works inside the context of the Arab Spring and those uprisings, that would be great to hear that. More fine-grained analysis other than, oh yeah, these are the broad percentages of people who like something.
I'll let Zeynep start because she has more followers on Twitter than me.
Well, that was Sasha Costanza, Chuck, by the way, who's doing research with Christie on the Occupy movement. And one thing that I find fascinating about the Arab uprisings and the Occupy is exactly what he says, is that there's actually not that large a network of key people who have been working at their media skills, their networking skills, their political organizing, that form the backbone. And that's kind of what I was alluding to by saying there's this huge sort of this smaller network embedded in this larger network, embedded in these big, and in the Arab Spring, in the Arab uprisings, the network goes back, when I talk to people, maybe to 2000s, and the first attempts are like the anti-Iraq war protests, Cairo 2004, 2005. Those are when people started learning how to do stream, how to organize. And you see, when you look at the Occupy movement, I meet people and I'm like, don't I know you from Seattle 99? And they were there trying to do the same thing, and they have built. So there's this incredible knowledge, infrastructure, key people that you don't necessarily see. The second thing is that, and I wrote about this, that is this really a leaderless revolution? Social media is an open space, that is correct, but an important thing to understand is that open spaces of networks can throw up hierarchies, and I will use the word hierarchy, completely fine, more easily sometimes than structured spaces, because in an open network, you have a mechanism which you might call the rich get richer, where if you already have some attention on you, then the media come and interview you, and then you get more followers on Twitter, and then you have more of a voice, and then media come interview you. So in my first initial analyses, for example, during the first few months of the uprising, you could clearly see a few like elite leaders go very quickly up, where everybody else was sort of more just sort of hanging in there, increasing, but not at the same rate. And if anybody's into network theory, that kind of preferential attachment throws up what we call power laws, in which there are a few people with very high levels of visibility and lots of people with less. You see this in the blogosphere. You see, so it's not a flat space, it's an open space. That's different. But one interesting finding that this is kind of new, and this is Alex Dunn's research that just got published. After the talk, I will go tweet it out, is that the network, even though it's hierarchical, because of these properties, we have these unfortunate field experiments when somebody gets arrested. So it's an experiment when you have a hierarchy and somebody on top is taken out, and what happens? What you see is that the network seems to spring up a new hierarchy. So it's quite more resilient. So it's not like the civil rights movement and you can go and assassinate Martin Luther King. It's not like you can take one person out and then the network collapses, because it is a network. It is different kind of institutional. But it does equilibrate back into a hierarchy. So I think this goes back to the question of what are we going to see? Is this going to be more democracy? Is this not? This is open spaces, yes. Flat spaces, no.
Okay, I've been signaled that we don't have much more time, but there was one more question. Can we take two more questions? Yes? Okay, great.
Hi, Zeynep, I have two questions for you. I'm working for an institute, and we did some research also on the role of social media in the Arab uprising. So the first question is, as far as I got from your presentation, the numbers were only from Egypt, and they were only from the Tahrir Square, actually.
Right.
So how far is it transferable? And the second point is, the role in general of social media. I see the impulse that it gives, but even if we have like 5,000 citizens, journalists, for the momentum, in total, like the number is not much.
Right.
It's just, so therefore, if you take the whole number, it's not really a representative or a big part. It brings momentum, very true, but it's still just a minor part, even like 5,000 people.
Okay. So my research is, this one is Egypt, Tahrir Square. I mean, it's exactly what it is, a protester survey, and that's what we meant to do. Fadi has broader regional numbers, so you can look at that. And for the second part, that 500 citizen journalists was from my little sample of 1,000. So if you project, you're talking about tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of citizen journalists. Once the news director of YouTube said to me, and YouTube has a news director. YouTube is probably the biggest news organization in the world today. She said that after about an hour of anything of significance happening anywhere in the world, they get video. We've seen in the case of Syria, in spite of enormous efforts to suppress, there are hundreds, if not more, video coming out every day. Who gets to see it? Does it make sense? How do you understand all that? I completely agree it's complicated, but I think the classic kind of information suppression where something would happen somewhere and you just wouldn't know what happened, and then you'd find out 5 years later, 1 year later, you try to go back and reconstruct. I think that era is effectively over. I'm not sure what it will lead to, but I think that's just done.
Okay, I see that I'm going to try and bring it to an end. I know there are more questions. The more both of you talk, the more questions there are. So I would encourage both of them have posted here where they can be reached on Twitter or how they can contact you. I think that's great. And maybe you'll stick around if somebody wants to ask you questions during the break. That would be excellent. So thank you very much. Thank you both for coming. I found it a very informative presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.